You're listening to the Chasing Tails Outdoor Podcast, where when you can't be in the outdoors, we bring it to you. Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of the Chasing Tails Outdoor Podcast. My name is Walt, and I'm joined by my co-host, Chase. Dude, the monkey's off the back. I've got a cooler full of deer. You guys heard kind of part of that story last week. It feels really good to have gotten on the board a month earlier than I did last year.
Yeah, man, you did. You went to a state you're familiar with. That's where your roots are in hunting, and you were able to get it done on some public land in Georgia. So that was awesome. And you got to hunt with Greg Godfrey from Tethered as well. So you had a great trip.
Yeah, it was kind of cool. You know, I feel like in the past years I've said a lot of times to people here that I feel like my skills exceed what I'm able to produce in this area, and it was kind of a bit of a point of pride to be able to go back to Southeast Georgia, where I grew up, and step foot on a piece of soil that I've never been on before, and to be able to strike a deer in 3.5 days. It really felt good. I'm not going to sit here and lie to you guys. It felt really good.
Yeah, I bet it did, man. 'Cause it took you, well, at least a while on the public land down here. You've had success on some private parcels in your area, but it's not easy, especially for the state of Florida. There's a lot that you got to learn and try to figure out, and the deer just don't really follow a lot of your normal patterns that you would find in other places.
No,
there's just so many different
really
places they can go. There's nothing that really makes them go certain ways. And last year, you had like no acorns, so it was just they could be anywhere hitting browse. So it's tough.
It is. Last year I got that doe. The week right before bow season ended. So that was like mid to late November when that happened. I think it was November 18th actually. But this year has been a fun one. You know, we did that episode early on in the year where we predicted that this year would be a good one for us. Basically, we had a lot of fun things coming on, and I didn't harvest the deer that I shot the first time, but technically I drew blood within 10 days of the start of deer season in September in Georgia, and my season hasn't really gone according to plan here in Florida yet, but that's okay. It's a grind. Craig Kroom was texting me a minute ago, and we were hoping to meet up and swap out some SD cards. And I told him I wasn't going to be able to make it, and he said, "Just remember, it's a grind. It's a long season." And he's right. I got till February here.
Yeah, you still got a long ways to go, and I keep reminding myself that. I've had some encounters. Unfortunately, I had the issue with the buck on public land as well. And it's more of I'm kind of chasing a different class of deer. So that I got to remind myself that too. Like those opportunities just don't happen every time you go out. And it's just it's something that I know that some of these bigger deer that I'm chasing are a lot more killable in like the December time frame. Right now, they're kind of all over the place just because Florida's rut's so weird. It's hard to pattern what they're doing. But I'm looking forward to my Iowa trip, which is coming up in a week. I'll be headed to Iowa, and then I can get focused back down here and maybe get on a couple of these big bucks that I'm after.
Yeah, that's right. So kind of give everybody you've been getting on some action. I mean, you were sending me videos the other day. Kind of give everybody an update of what you're seeing over there. I mean, you're definitely getting on deer.
Yeah, our black powder season for Zone C just started yesterday. And I went out to a traditional spot that I always kind of go to. It's more of maybe it's like an observation sit, but it definitely can be a kill sit as well, just because you can see so far. And it's really good for the rut because if bucks are chasing does, then they're going to chase them across this area. And yesterday morning started out kind of slow, but then the action kind of picked up, and I saw 4 different bucks out. 2 of them were actively pursuing does, and there were a couple that were on kind of either following a doe or they were on the trail where the does had been chased before. A couple of them, I got a bunch of footage with my cell phone. I might be able to make a video out of it. I thought I was going to be able to use my camera in this tripod setup that I have, but I got my kit, broke my kit out, of course, the night before, and realized that they sent me like two different sets of bolts, and it's kind of like for to go around like a rail. It's like a rail mount, and they sent me 5 of one set of screws and 3 of the other set of screws. Well, it takes 4, and of course the 5 they sent me was the wrong size, and I need to go get a 4th screw to be able to use that for the mount. So I was bummed out about that, and I really wasn't able to stick the GoPro anywhere either. And I was like, well, I'm just going to use my cell phone when I can. And I got quite a few. I think I got 3 out of the 4 bucks on my cell phone. And one of the bucks, like, he was chasing does and running them a little bit, and got does that were right on me that I got some video of. So it was pretty neat. So I may just make a video out of it because there is quite a bit of footage from it.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's what they were. That's what they were doing yesterday morning. I hunted yesterday evening. Kind of in the same area, and it was real slow. I did see a bunch of, it seemed like yearlings, like they were just like single does, but they were all small, out just kind of roaming around feeding, which usually to me that's a sign of the rut for sure, is they've been abandoned for right now because mom's out with a buck somewhere. And I went this morning, and it was kind of a ghost town. I went to a different area. I didn't even see a deer from the stand this morning, which wasn't super surprising for that area because we're in Florida. So in that area, a lot of the chasing and stuff that I see normally happens like that first week of November, second week of November. And on this other property, which is only like 3.5 miles, 4 miles as the crow flies from it, most of the rutting activity is now. Like it's like late October through maybe the first week of November. So which is, it's always kind of weird to me how that can be the case 3 or 4 miles apart, but it seems like it is. And that's all I've got for right now. I mean, I've been on a few bow hunts, seen deer, been getting on deer, just hadn't been getting on the quality of deer that I'm looking for. And a lot of the bucks that I've kind of been after, it's been a lot of nocturnal movement that I've seen, and
Right.
they're spread out. I'm catching them on my cameras, but with no consistency, like time of day or anything like that, other than it could be like 5 o'clock in the morning or it could be 9 p.m. And not in the same areas. Like I may catch one of my bucks on a camera on the far north side of the property one day, and then 2 or 3 days later, he's on the south side of the property. So to me, that just means they're out, they're cruising a lot, looking for does, and they're not moving a whole lot in the daylight, at least according to my cameras.
You got a ways to go, and at any point in time, you could be on that hot doe. It's kind of weird, right? Because one of the things we talk about is the fact that those deer can be just about anywhere. The rut kind of helps keep them moving, but how many days or how long do you think it takes before all your does come through their cycle?
To me, it seems like it takes probably a couple of weeks,
Yeah.
or maybe a little bit longer. It seems like that's how long from when I'll start seeing chasing pretty good until you're not really seeing that activity anymore, and you're not seeing like sometimes on your trail cams you'll see like a doe on the trail cam, and then all of a sudden a buck shows up, and you can tell that he's bumping her around a little bit in those areas, and
Sure.
I'll see that for probably a couple of weeks, maybe a little bit longer, and then about a month later, I'll start seeing it again in those areas for the does that didn't get bred.
How do your bucks act during that little window between the two periods?
It really kind of depends. In some areas, they're real aggressive.
Mm-hmm.
They'll start fighting. We did notice a buck the other day. It was a really good 8-point. He's already broken off one of his sides.
Really?
Yep, just completely broke off the one side. He's only got 4 points on one side now. Um, and last year I noticed that there was a bunch of fighting going on because it seemed like once November kind of hit, there was a lot of bucks that were broken. Like they were either missing tines or part of their rack, which was, I was like, man, where's all this fighting going on at? Because I never hear it or see it. You know what I mean? It's not something that you encounter a lot during while you're hunting in Florida. Although the other day, a buddy of mine said that he had two bucks fighting in front of him. It was right before daylight, and he said they were fighting right in front of him, and he said it was insane. He said it sounded like you just took two paddles together and were just hitting them together as hard as you possibly could. And it lasted for a little while, he said. So I was like, man, I've been hunting in Florida for going on 14 years now, and I've never really seen like a knockdown, drag-out fight between two bucks. I've seen them sparring and stuff on camera, and then every now and then I've seen some small bucks kind of tickle the antlers together, but I've actually never seen a fight between bucks in Florida. But I know they do because they show up broken quite a bit, especially on that one property that I hunt. And they'll be out. It just depends. I mean, they're out. Obviously, they're out kind of cruising around. I think a lot of these older, mature bucks lock down with does early, and that's why they're so sporadic, and you're not really seeing them on the cameras as much anymore, and they're just not really on their feet as much chasing because they're mature now. They know when the does are pretty much ready, so they're not as eager as some of the younger bucks that are just going to be out running them to run them. They don't know why they're running them; they just are, and the does are having nothing to do with them. That's how it was yesterday when that buck was chasing. It was three does, and it was almost like a stair step group of does. It was like a real mature doe, one that was probably a couple of years old, and then one was a yearling, and they were all in a line. They all pop out in a line. And I can see him kind of looking back. I'm like, oh, there must be a buck behind him. And sure enough, here comes this buck. And he's hauling butt, running, and they go into some separate set of woods. And then about 10 minutes later, he bumps them back out. And they're all running all over the place trying to get away from him. So, I mean, that's always fun to see. You'll see, like right now, you'll see a lot of those small bucks doing that. Today when I left my house, I was actually going to grab some lunch. And there's a few deer around my house, not very many, because it's kind of a lot of wide open, like cattle pasture and things. Right. But there are some little isolated pockets of woods. And we're driving down this road, and I just look, and there's this buck. He was maybe a 4-point, and there was this person's yard. He was in this yard. I could see him running circles with his nose on his ground at like 12:45 in the afternoon. I couldn't see a doe or anything, but he just had his nose on the ground running circles. And all of a sudden I see him catch like a something, and then boom, he was hauling butt the other way. So these little ones will be out running a lot.
Yeah.
I don't see a lot of the big ones chasing too much until a little bit later. I think when they start to run out of those first set of does right there, right when they first start going in, they'll be out a little bit more looking. But right now they're just they know the ones that are ready, and it doesn't take much for them to get locked down with one.
Interesting. I wondered. I've always kind of wondered what it's like because I think we have a pretty obvious like first and second rut here. You know, we've talked about this on the podcast. You know, last year in middle of February, I got a buck breeding a doe right here behind the house, and you know the rut here is supposed to be mid-January, and so I think one of my tactics next year is going to be, you know, mark 3 weeks from whenever the quote unquote peak rut should be on a piece of property and get back in there like it's, you know, like it's the rut because, you know, the season runs through the end of February for me. And if mid-February I've got bucks breeding does, I think I need to kind of consider February a viable month for whatever does are straggling. Because I first off, I think the buck to doe ratio is out of whack pretty badly here in favor of does, and also I don't think all these does come into heat anywhere near like the same period as all the others because last year, dude, you and I are hunting in mid-January. I think it was mid-January when you came up.
Yeah.
And I had groups of like 5 and 6 does just walking around, acting like they'd never been harassed, no signs of distress, yearlings with them, and it's like, either the rut's like way past already, or you haven't really got fired up yet, you know?
Yeah, yeah, I've seen some of that on some of the properties that I hunt. There'll be some, like I said, there's a bunch of yearlings out by themselves, and then on the other
Uh huh.
property, there's a big group of does still together, not acting nervous or anything like that. And normally, this time of year, they're walking around with like their tails tucked between their between their legs, like real skittish, looking
Yeah.
back, waiting to be harassed by whatever bucks are in the area. And so it is interesting. And I forgot to mention is on the piece of public that I'm hunting, which is, I don't know, probably 40 minutes from my house. And I hunt pretty close to my house, the areas that my private areas that I hunt. They were running hard a couple of weeks ago.
Oh,
That
really?
day that I shot at that buck, I mean, he was out cruising, and we saw several other bucks out cruising, and another one that was dogging a doe a couple of weeks ago. So over
Well,
there, it seems like it kind of is a little bit earlier than it is even where I'm at.
so break down what kind of briefly for everybody, since you're kind of in it right now. What does your rut strategy look like, or what areas are you targeting and why?
Well, it kind of depends. Mainly, I'm hunting the rut now with my muzzleloader. So I've got my muzzleloader out. I can reach out a little bit further than I can with the bow. Normally, I feel confident with my muzzleloader out to about 200 yards. So I get in some good areas that I know are good, but I try to stay back a little bit and just places that I can kind of observe more. In areas that I know that there are big groups of does, I'll start kind of focusing on those where the doe groups are, and where that because they kind of hang out in the same areas most of the season, and
Hmm.
that's when I'll try to get close to doe bedding areas and areas that I can see, and look for any signs of chasing or the bucks are running them. I'll be checking the roads a lot. I mean, roads are a lot of times good places to hunt. I know some places you can't on public necessarily hunt a road with a gun, but other areas I'll look for because you'll see tracks in the roads. Like once I start seeing a bunch of running tracks and things like that in
Hmm.
the road, then I'll start. I know that hey, the rut's getting close, and sometimes I'll even just set up in them roads
Sure. No.
because if they're out there running them in the roads, then heck, I've shot deer in the roads before. So,
Yeah.
and some of those big doe bedding areas are near roads, so they'll
Right.
bump them out of there, and them does will get on the roads, so they can run a little bit easier and get away from those bucks, and then the bucks will be in tow.
Yeah, I think that's going to be something that I enjoy this year is getting up in areas where I can see a distance, because this year will be the first year that I return to really seriously rifle hunting, and there's a lot of areas where I think will serve as bedding areas. Like there are some pine flat thickets. In fact, over where I killed my doe this past year is a prime example of this. I probably won't hunt that close to the road just because everybody will see me. But um, there are these pine thickets with a good heavy browse underneath that are directly adjacent to swamp bottoms, and that harsh transition line that occurs there. I probably never would have hunted that with the bow just because there's nothing to funnel those deer there, right? Like I don't care to see something at 100 yards if I can't kill it. But
Right.
with the rifle, I could see myself going and focusing on some of those areas, and I think those will serve as prime areas for bucks to acquire and chase does. Visually speaking, I think they can find those does. They can run those edges, let those thermals pull down through the flats. If they haven't found a deer, or rather, if they aren't on a deer, I think they can let those thermals pull across those flats. They'll go downwind of them, and I kind of think that I'm going to find some success doing that this year. I think hunting with a gun in Florida is almost required.
Yeah, you will have some success with that. Like we've mentioned before, is these deer don't use the same trails every day.
Right. Yeah.
I've seen, like where I was at yesterday, it was one of those things where one day they may pop out a trail 50 yards from you, and then the next time you hunt, they may be all crossing a trail that's 125 yards from you. Or they
Right.
may be all crossing the north one day, and you're expecting everything to cross the next day from the north, and then everything's crossing to the south of you that day. So I think you just got to kind of stack the odds in your favor a little bit in Florida when there isn't a whole lot to funnel them
Yeah,
and
yeah,
break out the
and I
big
think
guns.
what I've learned with trail cameras this year has been remarkable, and that is you can find incredible sign, incredible trails. I'm talking just trails that you look at and you're like, God, they have got to be walking this every day for this to be here. Like there's just no world in which a deer isn't frequenting this all the time. And I've hung cell cameras, and this has been the most remarkable component of it is you'll go, you might get 3 buck photos, and then you'll go weeks without a deer photo, and then all of a sudden here comes a group of does down that trail, and it is so difficult here to find something that requires them to to use the same spot because they've just got so many different avenues. It's not like we have. I almost wish we had more clear cuts, Chase, where where they felt so uncomfortable that it would funnel some of their movements. But you know, you're kind of finding a good food source, finding an area you think they might be bedding on, and then posting up and watching from a distance and kind of hoping for the best. So rifle hunting, I think this year will bear itself out, and I'll be able to do an abundance of evening hunts, here close to the road in the national forest.
Yeah, yeah, that's kind of where it's at. And one of the rut strategies that I really didn't mention is you just got to put time in the stand.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I mean, the more amount of time you can put in the stand during the rut, obviously the better chances are that you're going to see a deer and hopefully be able to harvest one.
Yeah.
So you got to
For
put the
sure.
time in. So, I mean, if you're only going out a couple of days during the rut, then you're really not getting all out of it that you can.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and if you're only going to go for a couple days, it might behoove you just to go ahead and make the most of it and do all day sits and be done with it.
Yeah.
I mean it's kind of a no-brainer in that regard. But talking about early season tactics, we just got back from Southeast Georgia, and I have a burning desire to get a certain guest on the podcast after this. We've talked about it a lot. I've talked about it probably more than you have. I want to get Warren Womack on the podcast because I did something this past week that it's one of those things where as a hunter, or any time that you have a craft or something that you're working hard, you have these like little breakthrough moments. Dude, I found a hot feed tree, and not just like a feed tree with food underneath it with sign. I'm talking like the kind that Warren Womack has described, and it was remarkable how insistent the animals that wanted to use that tree would be, because when we're in Southeast Georgia, finding deer sign wasn't hard. Finding daylight active deer sign was quite difficult. In fact, I think Greg saw a deer the first sit of the hunt, and then didn't see anything until almost the very end of the hunt. I didn't see a deer until I found that feed tree. I actually almost overlooked it. In fact, I told Derek while we were there, we were scouting this block of timber. It was a water oak. And the remarkable thing is, I've always been told that deer won't eat water oaks. If there's something else out there, right? If there's a white oak dropping or a live oak dropping, that the water oaks are the last resorts. The funny thing was, there were white oaks dropping 100 or so yards from me, and there was no sign under them whatsoever. In fact, there were acorns all over the place, but this one water oak, the leaves and all the pine straw and everything around it were raked back. And I told Derek, it's like, dude, that's just turkey sign. Those are turkeys scratching. And I was wrong. It was deer and hog sign, where they were coming to this tree throughout the day multiple times. It was kind of cool. I think we have to have Warren on, because now I feel like I can ask him questions maybe in a little more intelligent fashion.
Yeah, we do need to get Warren Womack on. I've heard him on just numerous podcasts. He's always seems like a good guest. He's got a ton of stories. I mean, that's what the basis of this podcast was stories.
Yeah, yeah.
And I think that he has a good approach, but one of his things is a lot of scouting.
Yeah.
He puts a lot of boots on the ground, and if he's not finding the sign that he thinks he should, then he gets down and he spends pretty much the whole day scouting until he finds something like you found, and then he sets up on it immediately. So I think a lot of people need to hear from someone like Warren to kind of have that confidence of, I need to set up on this now because this feed tree may not be good next weekend when I can hunt.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's really what it boiled down to was, we weren't seeing any deer, and I had 3.5 days to hunt. I think it was 3.5. I think I can't do the math myself. 3.5, 4 days to hunt, and we did a lot of scouting. In fact, one afternoon while Derek, Greg, and Greg's cameraman were hunting, I spent the whole afternoon. I just didn't feel good where I was at. It just didn't feel right, and I spent that whole afternoon, another 4 hours that day, scouting, and finally just eliminated enough ground that I went back to where this water oak was. But while I was setting up this morning, I went in there kind of blind. When we had originally scouted this tree Thursday morning, I went back Saturday morning to hunt it. When I went in there, we picked out trees for a southern wind because the following Friday when I was potentially going to hunt it, it was a southern wind, but the wind had shifted out of the northeast. So I went in there like, screw it, I'll find a tree. There was food dropping. There was deer tracks down there and actually fresh scrapes as well. So it wasn't like there was a lack of sign. It just, when we scouted it Thursday, it just didn't, the pieces didn't connect for me. It just didn't feel like it was the place to be. And Saturday morning I go in there, speaking of, blew several deer on the way in, which was like, okay, well, as I got close to the stand, I started busting deer. I was like, okay, that's good. And I started busting haws. I was like, okay, that's good. But as I was setting up in the tree, actively climbing the tree, I had hogs come to the base of the tree that I was in 3 different times. 3 different occasions they would cautiously approach the tree while I was in it and would start feeding at the base of it. And then when I would make a movement that they just couldn't tolerate anymore, they would bust off about 50 or 60 yards and stop and stomp. And I would keep climbing, and eventually I'm sitting in the tree. They are directly downwind of me. They can smell me, but they were still actively trying to get to that tree. And mind you, 100 yards away are live oak acorns sitting on the ground. Bigger, larger, probably easier to digest. They desperately wanted to be at this tree. And it was remarkable to me to see something that you don't fool its nose, right? Like, you're not going to fool a deer or a hog's nose. But I knew those hogs could smell me. They're walking over my ground scent. In fact, they walked up next to the Ebike that I had ridden in there and sniffed it. They just wanted to be at that tree. And that was like the first and only time that I can think of that I had found a food source so coveted by animals, they were willing to override the fact that I was in that tree that they were trying to feed under.
Right. Yeah. That is kind of strange.
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't know. Maybe they were just getting just a slight whiff of you or something.
That's possible.
Maybe it wasn't strong enough to them. It would maybe just kind of hit them just a little bit. And they'd kind of spook a little bit, but like, oh, wait a second. Maybe they thought it was like, it's further away than I think it is, or something. Or like you said, maybe it was just so hot that they were willing to chance it.
Yeah.
Before something else could get to it.
The tree was perfect cover at 12 feet. I'm sitting 12 feet off the ground. I'm as they're approaching the tree the first time, I'm 8 feet off the ground. I'm I'm there. They're seeing me. It was the only thing I can think of is maybe the combination of it is certainly possible that they smelled me and they just decided that the food source, they had cover of darkness. Maybe they felt like they could get in there and eat. I think it's also entirely possible that the ruckus that I made at the bottom, I wasn't clanking things, but I was walking around. Maybe they also thought I was a hog initially, so that they kept, they thought that there was, they know there's a food source there, but then, I hear something over there that sounds like a hog. So, maybe it's safe. But dude, I even had the doe that I ended up shooting that afternoon, which, don't let me forget, there's a really interesting, how close that deer let me get to where it was bedded earlier that day, part of this. But even that doe, as she came to the tree, she came downwind of me, almost the entire time from like 125, 130 yards out. And you could tell she was catching a whiff of me, and maybe the thermals weren't, or maybe the wind wasn't doing quite what I thought it was, Chase. But she would just kind of like bop her head up in the air. She would like throw her nose up in the air, and she would catch a whiff of me. But she kept looking at the base of that tree, and she was just making this big circle around the tree and just cut in at 20 yards. I genuinely believe that there was some reason why those animals felt confident enough to come to that tree, despite, daylight movement, despite maybe smelling something. I think they just really wanted to be eating at that tree, and they were kind of willing to risk it for the biscuit.
Yeah, I mean, it's a possibility. I haven't really found any of those trees where I'm at right now, because it seems like their acorns are they're sporadic a little bit, but they're more and more starting to drop like every day. And
Right.
I noticed that there was a lot of deer sign in the roads. There was a bunch of live oaks dropping in these roads, and I did kind of notice, I'm like, I think a lot of these deer, and it could be, I'm sure it's at nighttime or whatever, they're spending a lot of time there because, like I said, the dirt was kind of churned up. There was tons of tracks in those areas, and they're just dropping these live oak acorns in the roads. And I have found other acorns, and I'm like, man, how come they're not on these acorns? You know what I mean? It's kind of like a
Right.
mystery. It's like, why aren't they on these as opposed to these live oaks? I would figure that they would want to be on these oaks more, and they're just not. I wish I knew the answer to why they just prefer some trees over the other. It would definitely help out a lot, but it's kind of strange that they would be that eager to get to that tree. But
Yeah, I mean it was remarkable, the sign under that tree. Once I started, once that morning, once those hogs kept coming back, and I'm just sitting there like racking my head, Lord. I'm racking my brain trying to figure out like why are these hogs keep coming back? Why do they keep coming back? The sunlight comes up. Of course, they don't come back during daylight.
right.
that that's just too much to ask. But the sunlight comes up, and as I look around my tree, the base of my tree, and the two trees that are around me that were dropping, very very close proximity, there was no leaf litter around the base of any of these trees. I mean, genuinely, it looked like you had raked the forest floor back. There were caps on the ground. There was not a single acorn to be found on the ground anywhere, which is why originally I disregarded it as just turkey scraping, because there weren't even like acorn husks or shells or anything like that to be found where maybe something had been chewing them up and it had fallen out their mouth. They had just been sucking that vacuum, that forest floor like a vacuum. And when you heard the hogs coming in, you could just hear them just crunch, 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 crunch. I mean, they were just vacuuming the forest floor. It was quite remarkable. I don't know that I've ever seen a preferred food source like that before, where they were just genuinely. I guarantee you, if you put a cell camera up, your phone would just explode with photos, because they would be there all night long. And I bet you, so long as there wasn't a human right there in that area, I bet you multiple times a day those animals are coming back and hitting those trees. It was really cool. The squirrels were there. The raccoons were up in the trees. It just seemed like that area was alive, and that was kind of one of the things I did today. Was as I walked these bottoms, I'm trying to replicate this, and I'm listening, right? Listening for squirrels. I'm listening for all kinds of animal activity, because that area in southeast Georgia that I hunted just felt like a hub of activity.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's nice when you can find that.
Yeah,
And now, if you've kind of figured that out, hopefully you can replicate that down here and find some of those areas. I know there are areas like that out there. I just haven't really found them this year on the properties that I hunt.
sure.
And and even some on the private, like if you get a hot feed tree, kind of like what you're talking about, and you have people, they're putting out corn and feeders and stuff like that, they'll abandon those feeders and corn, and
Mm-hmm.
they'll be on those
Mm-hmm.
hot feed trees.
Yeah.
which kind of is like, whoa, why are you abandoning this? But they will. All of a sudden, they'll just turn off of it, and you're like, what happened to all these deer? And then you realize, well, they've found, there's a hot feed tree somewhere, and that's where
Right.
they're at, and that's where you need to be.
Yeah. Yeah. I think I don't know that you're going to find many of these. I think when this is one of the reasons we need to have Warren on here, because you and I we're hypothesizing. The man lives it. He could tell us for sure, Walter, you're being ridiculous. Of course they didn't smell you, or I find one of those per 1,000 acres. But you know, I think that oftentimes this is going to be entirely subjective to if that oak tree even holds acorns, right? Like, I mean, I may
Right.
have found a honey hole that once every 3 years is a honey hole. Yeah, and I think the whole scouting as much as you can, as often as you can, is really going to pay off, because you're going to come up with, probably, I'd be willing to bet you, Chase, if you start looking for dominant feed trees on your property, you'll probably find maybe a half dozen or so, and every so many years they're just going to cycle through, and those will be your hot trees. But I think if you're not scouting a bunch throughout the season, I think this is really where the beauty of what Warren does, and even Dan Infalt and other people, that in season scouting, it seems like they scout way more than they hunt. I think I'm going to have to try and work more of that into my, I mean, it's what I did today, but I think I need to work more of it into what I do, because it kind of was remarkable what I found, and it was only because I scouted probably about twice as much as I hunted that trip.
Yeah, yeah, and I think a lot of your scouting is going to lead you to more like high quality sits,
Yeah.
and instead of hoping, you're actually hunting. I hear that
Yeah.
a lot. It's like, dude, don't go hunting hoping. Go with a purpose, and if you're going to go hoping, then you probably shouldn't hunt. You should probably scout
Right.
and find sign and go, okay, yeah, this looks like this is where the deer is at. This is where I'm going to come in next time, and hopefully get on some deer, as opposed to just like, oh well, I didn't really find anything. I'm just going to set up here for
Yeah.
the day. Where if you would have spent the day scouting, you may find where a ton of scrapes have opened up,
Mm-hmm.
rubs. There's a hot feed tree within 100 yards of it, some good bedding, and you're like, man, if I just would have spent another couple of hours scouting instead of just sitting in this tree, whatever, 1,000 yards away, then I would have had a better chance at taking a deer.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's a great thing that you just touched on. Hunting. Hope. Would you say hunting? Hoping while you hunt.
Yeah, I just said that don't go hoping, actually go hunting
Right. Yeah.
instead. If you're just hoping to see something or kill a deer, then you're not really hunting. I mean,
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
more
Yeah.
of just like, oh, I'm just trying to win the lottery today. Maybe a deer will pass by me, but more than likely they won't.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's going to probably be my mantra moving forward. I appreciate you donating that to my cause. But I think that's something that I noticed was, I didn't feel like I was in a good spot. I didn't feel like I was in the money, and I just kept scouting. But here's what's kind of cool about what happened with that scouting. So after Greg opened my eyes to e-bikes, which I can just tell you right now, if you don't have one and they're legal where you are, you need to have one. Unless you're just one of those people that you walk like 200 yards off the road and hunt everywhere that you your private property or even your public. If you've got those opportunities, don't worry with it. But if there's anybody out here who has long walks in hot, humid environments, or environments where you just don't want to walk that far, an e-bike is absolutely a godsend. It's unreal. But I get down at lunch. So I was going to do an all-day hunt, and then Derek didn't like where he was that evening. For that evening hunt, he had put in a morning and an evening, and only saw a little forked buck and a doe. And so I got down, and on my way back to him, he had to tear everything down and meet me at the road. I ran down one of the pine rows that was right in front of me. So basically, think of pine rows running north to south with a water oak right in the middle of it. And as I rode down this trail, I noticed this real big thicket to my right. And this thicket to my right happened to be where this doe and the button buck had gone into the morning before and never emerged on the other side. So I ride the e-bike down this trail, make a big loop, come back down the same very trail. I'm only maybe 20, 30 yards from this small little thicket that's off to my left. It's a very, very small isolated pocket of brush, and go get Derek. Come back for that evening hunt, and out seemingly from this thicket come the buck and the doe. Well, everybody knows how the hunt went. I shot the doe. We find her in the brush. The blood tracking armadillo story. And I just think it's remarkable that deer, I believe that deer had gone in there embedded in that thicket. And I think it was there when I rode that e-bike by her. Because no matter what direction you looked outside of that, there was no real suitable bedding cover. It was all real open canopy. They had just come in and clear cut it. But this one area where there had very clearly been a bed before, I think because I was on that e-bike, I don't think I spooked that deer. I think it was just odd enough to her, like just outside the norm. Maybe it sounded like a breeze. Maybe it just, I don't know what it sounded like to that deer, but it never spooked that deer. And I am firmly convinced that button buck and that doe were sitting right there in that thicket the whole time.
Yeah, they probably were. I recently got an e-bike a few weeks ago, and I've noticed just even driving around in the woods with it, I'll see deer feeding, and they don't even lift their head up to look at me going by.
Right, yeah.
So there's definitely something to it, that whatever the noise is, it's not an alert type noise. It's not enough to bother them. I'm sure I always kind of use it as a lot of times deer, like they'll see a vehicle going by and they'll look at it. They'll pick their head up and look at it, and as long as the vehicle keeps going, then they do nothing. They just kind of go back to doing what they're doing. The second you slam on them brakes to see what's going on, they're hauling butt. But with these e-bikes, I haven't noticed anything with the deer. Even the e-bike, there's been a time where I parked it like real close to where I was. I've had does come in. They'll look at it strange, and they'll kind of check up a little bit and maybe go around it some. But I haven't had one like start blowing or start stomping or anything crazy like that. Like they'll kind of look at it. It's like, oh, wait a second, this wasn't here yesterday. I'm not sure what it is, but it doesn't really look like it's harmful. And I've just had them kind of skirt around it a little bit and do nothing to kind of disrupt the hunt. And I actually me and my buddy both bought e-bikes, and he's been taking his out, and there's been a time where he actually just rode his pretty much straight to the stand. He was running late, laid the e-bike down, and he said the does passed it and didn't even give it a second look. They just kept going.
That's awesome, man.
So
that's really cool.
I think if whenever we throw around the term like game changer, the e-bike is definitely a game changer. Yeah. I don't care if I get any thing from anybody saying, use the word game changer. It is. It definitely is. I mean, if you can get a mile back in Florida during bow season and you're not sweating to an area, it just makes it so much more enjoyable. When you're setting up, getting in the tree, you're not trying to like cool down. And then when you get down from the stand, you can get back to your vehicle a lot faster. I mean, it just saves so much time. And when you're out scouting and you want to go back a mile, you just zip back to that mile. Then you get down and do your scouting. You get back on your bike, zip back, and you're saving 45 minutes to an hour of walking that you probably would have done to get back to those areas. Yeah. So it's just such a big time saver. And like I say, you're not spooking deer. You're not leaving ground scent on the ground. I think there's just so many advantages to it, and that's why I'm glad I got one. And it sounds like you're about to purchase an e-bike. I mean, you got to ride it around for that one little weekend, and we're sold on an e-bike like almost instantly. Like I remember you texting me, like your first time on the e-bike, you're like, dude, e-bikes, I've got to have one.
Well, dude, it was 70. So the first time I rode on one, it was a high of 87 and a low of 76. That morning, it's 76 degrees, and I'm perfectly dry when I get to my tree. I was like, what is this? Like, this is garbage. Like, it made hunting in hot weather feel bearable again. Don't get me wrong. I was hot when I was in the tree stand, but it was 2 miles to where I was hunting. If I had walked that, I would have been drenched in sweat.
Oh yeah, and just riding, I've noticed even riding with it with my backpack and all my gear and stuff on it,
Yeah.
like you don't feel the weight of the backpack
No.
nowhere near as much as you
No.
do actually walking.
Yeah.
I'm just like, man, this is nice.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really cool, dude. I think it's one of those things. I think I said this on the last podcast with Greg. I genuinely believe like certain things do change the game, right? Being able to hunt just about any tree out of the saddle, the weight minimization of a saddle, whether that's obviously I'm going to catch hell from somebody who doesn't agree, but there are certain advantages. I don't know outside of the thermocell. I don't know of an item that has so radically improved me as a hunter. I mean, I can't, when I look at the e-bike and what it provides for me in my situation, again, if you only walk 200 yards, this probably you're not going to feel the same way. But in my situation, it's going to leave less scent on the ground. I can scout more efficiently. I can check trail cameras more efficiently. You got 2 hours in the afternoon. There are places that I've got trail cameras. I don't have enough time to get in there and get out in 2 hours. That's how deep some of these areas are. But with an e-bike, I could get in there and out in no time flat. The ability to go and mitigate your scent in the tree in hot weather. I mean, it seems like it elevates every component of being a hunter in the woods in this part of the country specifically. And I just think it's one of those things that you would never ever look back and be like, I could have done without that.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, there's no doubt about it. I would just wish I would have gotten mine years ago.
Yeah, me too.
Although
Me too.
they were a lot more expensive years ago. I mean, now there's more companies out that have them, so you don't have to break the bank
Right.
like you did originally. I remember first looking at them, I was like, well, $4,000 for an e-bike? They're crazy. But I probably thinking back now, I was like, man, if I'd had that e-bike for 10 years, it cost me $400 a year, and I
Right.
wouldn't have been sweating. But now, heck, there's e-bikes out there that you can pick up that are $1,500, heck, $800 depending on what you want. Some of them are foldable. You can throw them into your vehicles. And we're hoping to get somebody on to talk about e-bikes for
Yep.
a whole separate podcast.
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, I can say now that I have lined somebody up for that. At least one somebody. I've reached out to several different companies, and we're going to have someone come on and talk about e-bikes. There's a lot that goes into e-bikes. I slept on them. I did not give them the time of day that I probably should have. I will have one soon. Chase, I think what we should do is you'll have a full season into yours. There'll be a lot of things that you could probably pass on education wise to the listener. I'm buying a totally different style of e-bike than you are. It serves a totally different set of purposes. I think what we should do is get together, shoot a video, and go over your e-bike and what you want done, what modifications you might make, and compare it to mine, and kind of give everybody like a holistic, like here are the two different polar differences you could go with.
Yeah. Yeah, and they're two different price points. So
Yep.
depending on what your situation is, what type of vehicle you have.
Both very affordable price points.
Yeah. They're both super affordable.
Yeah,
in my opinion. So
yeah.
That would be kind of cool.
Yeah, I think it'd be a good fun time. And so, dude, why don't we kind of wrap this up here? We're coming up on 50 minutes, and I think whenever you and I go off, it's probably good to keep it to about 50 minutes, because otherwise it'll be a 3-hour podcast, and no one wants to listen to us for 3 hours.
Yeah, unfortunately, we were trying to line some guests up for this week, but nothing ever really clicked with anybody's schedule for this week in particular. Like we got somebody lined up for next week, and I think the week after that, it was just this week there was nothing kind of lined up, and we still wanted to make sure we were getting something out once a week, like we've been doing for a while now.
Yeah, yeah. It's been months since we've missed a week.
Yeah. It has. So I'm happy with that.
Let's go ahead and send everybody off. But while we're doing so, if you enjoy the podcast, if you enjoy the content that's coming down the pipe, and you want to support the show, check out Patreon, www.patreon.com/Chasing Tails Outdoors. It's a crowdfunding way. If you're not familiar with Patreon, it's a crowdfunding way for us to travel, for Chase to go to Iowa, for us to have hosting fees and invest in camera gear. That money goes right back into the podcast. And depending on your tier, you can get stickers and hats and shout outs on the podcast, as well as get entered into our 4 quarterly giveaways, of which we're giving away an Alps Pursuit pack, a set of 20-inch Titan straps, and a Scree Kaibab 170 merino top and bottom for you. And if you want to go save some money at Scree, you can use the promo code Chasing Tails, all caps TALES, and you'll save 15% off your order. So go support the people that support us. If you want to support the podcast directly, Patreon is your source. And most importantly, no matter what you do, get outside and enjoy the great outdoors.